Howdy again everyone. Recently I made a video about whether it's better to buy a cheap camera with a pro lens or a pro camera with a cheap lens. It wasn't a very serious video really, but I had fun putting it together with my wife's help as a camera person. I also had fun researching the cheapest, oldest, crummiest autofocus lens that I could find on eBay to fit onto my Canon EOS R5 camera. So to get even more value out of my outlay of £28 for it, here is a review of the ancient Tamron 28-80mm f3.5 to 5.6. It's an autofocus zoom lens from 1995, although it was updated to a slightly newer version in 1999 I think. Anyway, this is the older 77D version, and as I mentioned, it can be found on eBay for rock bottom prices, perhaps in case you need an emergency lens for your kit bag. It's a full frame lens which was released for a number of digital SLR camera systems. This one's for Canon EF mount, and I'll be testing it by adapting it onto my Canon EOS R5. The lens has the zoom range and maximum aperture of a bog standard zoomable kit lens from the film era, although in all fairness, maximum apertures of kit lenses in Canon land have been getting even darker than this recently. Still, its photographic potential for out-of-focus backgrounds is weak, and so this is the kind of lens you would seek to upgrade from as soon as possible, or, like I suggested, keep hidden away in a cupboard for emergencies. The build quality is typical for a lens of its time, although perhaps a little bigger than I thought it would be. Like the rest of the lens, its mount is made of plastic, never a good sign, and if you zoom the lens in, then its electronics are clearly visible on the inside, which means that dust and moisture ingress could be a problem for it if the lens isn't properly taken care of. The gunmetal grey colour of the plastic looks kind of cool, but the rubberized zoom ring with Tamron's old logo repeatedly bursting out of it is pretty gaudy, to say the least. That zoom ring definitely does not turn smoothly at all, I'm afraid. And for the first time in years, I'm reviewing a lens where the entire front glass element turns as you focus, which is a real pain for users of polarizing or graduated filters, and there's no focus clutch mechanism here, so you'd better remember to switch the lens to manual focus mode if you want to turn or even put pressure on that focus ring at any time, lest you strain the motor's gears. And the autofocus motor itself, slow, inaccurate, and it makes a noise like a cat being dragged down the motorway. Funnily enough, I do not feel nostalgic for the days when camera lenses handled like this. My copy of the lens came with a small hood, which clipped on bayonet style. Its filter thread size is 58mm. The lens is obviously not image stabilized, and for some reason, the in-body stabilization of my Canon EOS R5 camera didn't seem to work very well with it. Maybe the lens's electronic protocols are just too old. Anyway, this is simply the kind of poor build quality you'd expect from a cheap kit lens from 1995, I'm afraid. It works, just about, but also it feels like it's moments from death. Okay, image quality. No in-camera corrections were available for this lens on my EOS R5, I'm afraid, and I'll just be testing its full frame image quality today. At 28mm and f3.5, picture quality in the middle is acceptably sharp, but contrast is low, and a little purple fringing is visible on contrasting edges too. The corner image quality is a sheer disaster zone though, just look at it. Stop down to f5.6 for a little more clarity, but the corners are still dreadfully soft, with terrible chromatic aberration. Thankfully, the image in the middle is looking way sharper now, with good contrast at last. f8 looks about the same in the middle, but the corner image quality is beginning to improve. However, f11 and f16 see no further improvements, so this lens is clearly unable to provide satisfactory image quality at its widest angles. Let's zoom in to 50mm and look in the middle of the image again. Well, that purple fringing is back, isn't it? Ouch, it's glowing like Homer Simpson after a meltdown at the nuclear power plant. At least this time the corner image quality isn't so bad as before, although still the image is pretty soft and ghostly. Stop down to f5.6 for contrast to improve, and back in the middle, that purple fringing is mostly gone. At f8, it's totally gone, and sharpness is looking good, but not great. The corner image quality is looking quite good now also, although contrast is still fairly low. The image looks the same at f11 or darker. Let's zoom all the way into 80mm now. In the middle of the image, it's the same story as at 50mm, a nuclear purple glow around every contrasting edge, as well as low contrast and only average sharpness. The corners have gotten worse again, I'm afraid. They look very soft now. Stop down to f8 for only a touch more brightness and sharpness there, but a bigger improvement in the middle. It's only at f11 that the middle is finally fully clear of that unstoppable purple fringing, but the image is still looking a little soft and washed out, and the corner image quality is still looking very weak. Well, the results are even worse than I was expecting, quite frankly. Aren't you glad optical technology has moved on so much since the old days? Tamron's own lenses nowadays are mostly very sharp and competitive. This lens is a reminder of the bad old times when the third-party manufacturers were really scraping the barrel of what consumers might tolerate. Okay, let's look at distortion and vignetting. Back in the film era, lens manufacturers tried harder than they do nowadays to correct distortion issues because there was no way a film camera could do that for them, and at 28mm we're seeing some barrel distortion for sure, but modern zoom lenses are often even worse than this. The far greater problem is obviously that very ugly corner vignetting at f3.5. Stop down to f5.6, f8 and f11 for it to gradually go away. Zoom all the way into 80mm and any kind of distortion is now gone, and interestingly, straight from f5.6, vignetting is now very low. So it's a surprisingly good result for distortion, but that vignetting at 28mm is pretty gnarly. Another weakness of this lens is its minimum focus distance of only 70cm, meaning you'll never be able to get very close to any subject at all, something I hate to see. Close-up image quality is still pretty bad, but at least it's no worse than at normal distances. Stop down to f8 for best results here. Let's see how this lens works against bright light now. Flaring is there and it's broad, but it's not too opaque. It's not good, but frankly I was expecting worse. Finally, let's take a look at the quality of this lens's bokeh. It's difficult to even get out of focus backgrounds with this lens, but when you do, they're pretty ugly looking actually, pretty busy. Overall, well, I'm glad I only paid £28 for this lens, because it's not even good for keeping for emergencies quite frankly, but it was at least fun to go back and examine a real old tinker to see how far lens technology and manufacturing really has come over the years. Certainly Tamron as a company have come along in leaps and bounds since these old things were hitting the market, and frankly I give thanks to God Almighty that even modern kit lenses can do so much better nowadays than this thing. Thanks for watching everyone. I love putting together these lens reviews, but they are costly and time consuming to do, even if the test subject only cost me £28. If you do appreciate these videos and you'd like to support the channel, then check out my Patreon page, where supporters get all kinds of bonus content and early access to videos that isn't available anywhere else. Ciao for now, everyone.